I'm taking my mistress instead. My husband texted me 10 minutes before our anniversary flight, and I remember staring at those words while holding 2 boarding passes I had printed myself, my name and his side by side like they had been for 40 years, and I didn't cry. I didn't call. I didn't even type a reply. I just lowered my phone onto the kitchen counter and listened to the quiet of the house we had built together. The same house he once stood in and promised would always be ours. Forever, no matter what. And for a moment I let that memory sit there beside the message, the past and the present colliding without making a sound. And then I walked to my desk, opened the drawer where I kept our documents, and pulled out the folder labeled in my own handwriting, the one that held every paper tied to this home, every signature, every decision, every year of my life folded neatly into legal proof. And I flipped it open slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I had already seen the signs leading here, the late charges on statements that didn't match his explanations, the faint scent of a perfume that wasn't mine lingering on his coat, the way his voice had changed when he said my name, softer, distant, like he was already speaking to someone else in his mind. And I had told myself it was nothing, that after 4 decades you learn to ignore small cracks. But this wasn't a crack, this was a clean break, delivered in one sentence, and still I stayed calm, because something inside me had already shifted before that message ever arrived. Something quiet and steady that didn't need tears to understand what was happening. I sat down at my computer, the screen lighting up the room in a cold glow, and I searched for the one thing he had forgotten, the one detail he had overlooked in his rush to start over, the ownership of this house, our house. And as the documents loaded, I realized I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one still standing in the center of everything he thought he could walk away from. And that was when I made my decision, not out of anger, not out of pain, but out of clarity, the kind that only comes when someone shows you exactly who they are, and you finally believe them. I did not rush. I did not panic. I simply sat there for a few minutes longer, listening to the refrigerator hum and the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. The same clock he had insisted on buying 20 years ago, because he said it made the kitchen feel like a real home. And I let that word settle in my mind, home, because it no longer meant what it used to, not after a single message had reduced everything we built into something disposable, something he could step away from without even looking back. And yet I noticed something else, something almost ironic. He had left without taking anything important, not the documents, not the keys to the safe deposit box, not even questioning what was legally mine as much as his. And that told me everything I needed to know. He was not thinking about consequences. He was thinking about freedom, and people who chase freedom rarely look behind them to see what they are leaving exposed. I opened the folder again and read each page carefully, slower this time, tracing every line, every clause, every signature, my signature, his signature, side by side. And I remembered the day we signed those papers, sitting in a small office with a real estate agent who congratulated us on making such a strong investment. Daniel had squeezed my hand and said this was just the beginning of everything we would build together. And I believed him then. I believed every word. But now those same signatures looked different, not like promises, but like leverage, quiet and waiting to be used. I turned to my computer again and searched for a local real estate agent, someone efficient, someone who understood urgency without asking too many personal questions, because I did not need sympathy. I needed execution. And within minutes I found a name, a number, a woman with decades of experience selling properties quickly in this area. I dialed without hesitation, and when she answered, her voice calm and professional, I matched her tone exactly. I told her I was looking to sell my house. I told her I was ready to move forward immediately, and when she asked if there was any particular reason for the urgency, I paused just long enough to choose my words carefully before saying that circumstances had changed and I preferred to act while everything was still within my control. She did not press further, which I appreciated. Instead, she asked for the address, the square footage, the condition of the property, and I answered every question with clarity, with precision, as if I had been preparing for this moment long before I even realized it. And when the call ended, I sat back in my chair and looked around the room, at the walls we had painted together, at the furniture we had chosen piece by piece, at the photographs that still showed 2 people who believed they would grow old side by side. And I did not feel sadness the way I thought I would. I felt something steadier, something colder, like a door closing quietly instead of slamming shut, because by the time he thought he was starting over, I had already begun finishing what he did not even know was. Ending I did not tell anyone, not a friend, not a neighbor, not even the one person who used to know everything about me, because there was no longer a reason to explain what had already become clear. Instead, I moved through the house with a quiet focus that surprised even me, opening closets, pulling out suitcases, not to pack everything, but to choose carefully, deliberately, because I understood now that I was not leaving my life behind. I was separating what was mine from what had only ever been shared, and that distinction mattered more than I had ever realized. I folded my clothes one by one, placing only what I needed into a single medium-sized suitcase, the kind that could fit easily in the trunk of a car, leaving behind the excess, the things that had once felt important but now seemed like decorations in a story that no longer belonged to me. And as I moved from room to room, I noticed details I had ignored for years, the small scratch on the hallway wall from when we moved, in our first piece of furniture, the slight discoloration on the carpet near the stairs where he had once spilled coffee and laughed it off, the framed photos that captured moments we used to call memories, but now looked more like evidence of a version of us that had quietly faded long before this day. I paused in the bedroom for a moment longer than the others, standing near the window where the afternoon light always came in just right, and I remembered how he used to stand there, talking about retirement, about traveling, about growing old without worry, and I realized those conversations had slowly become one-sided, his voice continuing while mine had grown quieter, less certain, as if I had been adjusting to something I did not want to name, and now I did not need to name it anymore, because it had already named itself through his actions. My phone remained silent on the nightstand, no apology, no explanation, not even a follow-up message, and that silence confirmed more than any words could have. I walked back to the living room just as my phone rang. The number unfamiliar but expected. It was the real estate agent calling back, her voice efficient, telling me she had reviewed the market and believed we could list immediately, possibly even attract a quick offer given the condition and location of the property. I listened carefully, asking the right questions, not emotionally but practically. How soon could we schedule a viewing? How quickly could paperwork be processed? What steps needed to happen first? And as she answered, outlining a timeline measured in hours and days rather than weeks, I felt something settle into place inside me, a plan taking shape with each detail, each confirmation, until it was no longer just an idea, but a sequence of actions that would move forward whether he knew it or not. When the call ended, I stood there in the center of the living room, the same place where we had once celebrated holidays, birthdays, quiet evenings that we thought would stretch on forever, and I understood something with complete clarity. He had chosen to walk out of this life without looking back, but he had underestimated the fact that I was still here, still thinking, still capable of deciding what happened next. And for the first time since reading that message, I allowed myself a small, almost imperceptible smile, not out of happiness, but out of certainty, because by the time he returned, nothing he expected would still be waiting for him. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Just a thin line of sunlight slipping through the curtains and stretching across the hardwood floor, and I woke up not with confusion or hesitation, but with a list already forming in my mind, clear and ordered, as if I had been preparing for this long before I ever admitted it to myself. I made coffee the same way I always did, measuring each scoop carefully, pouring hot water slowly, maintaining the routine not out of comfort, but out of control, because control was something I understood now in a way I had not before. When I sat at the kitchen table, I did not scroll through old messages or wait for his name to appear on my phone. I opened my laptop instead and began organizing everything that mattered: account numbers, identification, legal documents. Each file placed exactly where it needed to be, each detail reviewed twice, not out of fear of making a mistake, but because I no longer allowed anything to be uncertain. By mid-morning, the real estate agent arrived, punctual and composed, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she stepped inside and took in the space with a practiced eye. She complimented the condition of the house, the natural light, the layout. But I could tell she was already calculating timelines, potential buyers, how quickly this could move if handled correctly, and I appreciated that about her. She did not ask about my husband, did not question why I was the only one present. She simply focused on the task, and I matched that energy, walking her through each room, answering questions with precision, pointing out improvements we had made over the years, upgrades that increased the value. Everything framed not as memories, but as assets, something measurable, something transferable. When we reached the living room, she paused and said the market was strong, that if we priced it right, we could receive offers within days, maybe even hours, and I nodded as if she had just confirmed something I already knew, because by then I understood that speed was not just an advantage, it was essential. Every hour mattered. Every delay was a risk I was not willing to take. We sat down at the dining table where I had signed so many family cards, written so many holiday notes, and now I signed something else, the listing agreement, my name steady on the line, my hand not trembling even once. And when it was done, she gathered her things and assured me she would move quickly, that she would handle the details, the showings, the offers. All I needed to do was be ready. And as the door closed behind her, the house felt different, not empty, not yet, but already shifting, like it understood what was coming next. I stood there for a moment, listening again to the quiet. But this time it was not the silence of something lost. It was the silence of something being cleared away, and I walked upstairs, not to remember, not to hesitate, but to continue, because everything from this point forward was no longer about what he had done. It was about what I was choosing to do next, and I was not going to slow down. The call started that afternoon, not from him, but from numbers I did not recognize, agents confirming interest, scheduling showings, asking about availability, and I answered each one calmly, offering time slots, approving access, moving the process forward with a level of efficiency that even surprised me. By evening, there were 3 appointments set for the next day, back to back, each one a step closer to closing a chapter he believed he could return to whenever it suited him. I spent the rest of the night preparing the house, not in the sentimental way I once would have, not adjusting things to preserve memories, but refining it like a product, clearing surfaces, opening blinds, letting light in where shadows had lingered, removing anything too personal, anything that tied the space too closely to me, because this was no longer about us. It was about making it easy for someone else to see themselves here, to step into a space that no longer carried the weight of what had happened inside it. And as I moved through each room, I noticed how little I hesitated to let things go. Objects I once thought I could never part with now felt like placeholders, temporary, replaceable. I packed only what I had already chosen, leaving the rest exactly where it was, not out of carelessness but out of intention, because I understood something important now. The value of this house was not in the items inside it. It was in the structure itself, the location, the timing, the opportunity, and those were things I could act on immediately. The next morning the showings began. One couple walked through quietly, speaking in low voices about potential renovations. Another took notes, measuring spaces with careful precision, and I stayed present but distant, answering questions when needed, stepping aside when they wanted privacy, watching as strangers evaluated what had once been the center of my life with objective interest, and it did not unsettle me. It confirmed what I already knew. This place could belong to someone else just as easily as it had belonged to me. By midday, my phone buzzed with a message from the agent. An offer had come in, strong, above asking, with a quick closing timeline. I read the numbers twice, not because I doubted them, but because I wanted to be certain of every detail, every condition, every implication, and then I called her back, my voice steady as I discussed terms, timelines, next steps. There was no hesitation when I said yes, no pause to consider alternatives, because I was not negotiating emotionally. I was executing a decision I had already made. By the time the paperwork was sent over, I was ready, reviewing each line, signing each page, returning everything within the hour. And when it was done, when the confirmation came through that the house was officially under contract, I set my phone down and looked around one last time, not to say goodbye, but to acknowledge the finality of what I had just done, because somewhere far away he still believed he was returning to this place, to this version of his life. And he had no idea that by the time he stepped back through that front door, there would be nothing left for him to claim. The next 2 days moved faster than anything I had experienced in years, not chaotic, not overwhelming, but precise, each step falling into place with a kind of quiet momentum that left no room for doubt. The agent called early that morning to confirm the buyer wanted to expedite everything. Inspection scheduled immediately, paperwork prioritized, closing pushed forward to the earliest possible date. And I agreed to every reasonable request without hesitation, not because I was being agreeable, but because I understood the advantage of speed better than they did. Every hour that passed was one less opportunity for anything to interfere. I met the inspector at the house just after 9, walking him through the property with the same composed detachment I had maintained since the beginning, answering his questions, unlocking doors, providing access, all while noticing how the house already felt less like mine and more like something I was simply managing until the final transfer was complete. By the afternoon, the report came back clean, no major issues, no delays. And the buyer confirmed they were ready to proceed exactly as planned. I signed the next set of documents. That evening, reviewing each page under the soft light of the living room lamp, the same lamp that had once illuminated quiet conversations, shared plans, ordinary nights that now felt distant and irrelevant. And as I placed my signature at the bottom of the final page, I realized there was nothing left tying me here except time, and even that was running out by design. I spent that night not reminiscing, not walking through the rooms one last time, but preparing for departure with the same efficiency that had guided every decision so far. I arranged for a small moving service to arrive the following morning, not to empty the house, but to take what I had already selected. The rest would remain, part of the transaction, part of the closure. By sunrise, everything was ready. The suitcase by the door, the documents secured, the keys set aside in a small envelope labeled clearly for the new owners. And when the movers arrived, they worked quickly, loading the few boxes I had prepared. Without questions, without delay, and when the last item was placed into the truck, I walked back inside alone for a final check, not searching for anything forgotten, but confirming that nothing remained that I intended to take. The rooms echoed slightly now, not empty, but neutral, stripped of personal meaning, and I moved through them one by one, turning off lights, closing doors, until I reached the front entrance. I paused there for just a moment, my hand resting on the handle, not out of hesitation, but out of awareness, because this was the exact point he believed he would return to, the place he thought would still be waiting exactly as he left it. And without allowing myself a second thought, I opened the door, stepped outside, and closed it behind me, sealing not just the house, but the life he assumed he could walk back into. And by the time he realized what had changed, there would be nothing left for him to come home to. The drive away from the house was quieter than I expected, not because of the road or the morning traffic, but because there was nothing left pulling my attention backward, no second thoughts, no sudden urge to turn around, just a steady focus on what was ahead. I checked into a small furnished rental on the other side of town, nothing extravagant, just a clean space with large windows and neutral walls, a place that did not carry history, did not echo with conversations that no longer mattered. And as I set my suitcase down on the bed, I felt something unfamiliar, not relief exactly, but space, the kind that only appears when something heavy has been removed without being replaced yet. I placed the envelope from the closing company on the kitchen counter. Inside it was the confirmation of the completed sale, the transfer of ownership, the final step that made everything irreversible. I did not open it right away. I did not need to see the numbers again. I already knew what it represented: control, closure, and distance. My phone remained silent for most of the afternoon, which did not surprise me. He was still away, still living inside the version of events he had chosen, unaware that the foundation of that version had already been removed. I spent the next few hours setting up small things, arranging my clothes in the closet, placing my documents in a drawer, connecting to the wireless network. Each action simple, practical, grounding, and with each one, the reality of my new position became clearer. I was no longer reacting to what he had done. I had already moved beyond it. When the sun began to set, my phone finally lit up, his name appearing on the screen for the first time since that message. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times before answering, not out of hesitation, but out of intention. When I picked up, I did not say hello right away. I allowed the silence to stretch just enough for him to speak first. His voice came through slightly impatient, asking why I had not responded, asking if everything was ready for his return, and I could hear it in the way he spoke. The assumption, the expectation that nothing had changed except his plans. I waited a moment longer before replying, my tone calm. Even, unaffected, I told him everything had been taken care of, every detail handled, and for a second there was a pause on his end, a shift in his breathing, as if something in my voice did not match what he expected to. Here, he asked what I meant, and I answered simply. I said the house was no longer ours. I said it had been sold, finalized, completed, and the silence that followed was longer this time, heavier, not filled with questions yet, just the sound of realization beginning to take shape. He tried to speak again, but I did not give him time to reorganize his thoughts. I added one more sentence, clear and direct. I said by the time you come back, there will be nothing here waiting for you. And then I ended the call, not abruptly, not angrily, just decisively, placing the phone back down on the counter as the last light of the day faded through the window. Because for the first time in a very long time, the ending of something did not feel like a loss. It felt like a decision I had made entirely on my own. The next morning I woke up before my alarm, not because I was restless, but because there was a stillness in my mind that no longer needed sleep to escape anything. I made coffee and stood by the window of the small rental, watching the street below come to life in quiet, ordinary ways. People leaving for work, cars passing by, a rhythm that had nothing to do with me, and yet felt more honest than the life I had just stepped out of. My phone sat on the counter where I had left it, silent for a while, until it was not. The first call came just after 8, his name flashing again, followed by another, and another, the pattern urgent now, persistent, as if repetition could undo what had already been done. I let it ring each time, not out of avoidance, but because there was nothing left to explain. Everything that needed to be said had already been delivered in a single sentence, clear enough for anyone willing to hear it. By mid-morning the messages began, short at first, questions layered with disbelief, asking what I meant, asking how I could make a decision like that without him. And then the tone shifted, frustration rising beneath the words, accusing, demanding answers. But I did not respond. I did not need to defend a decision that was already complete. Instead, I focused on the small details of my new space, adjusting the curtains to let in more light, placing a book on the table, organizing the kitchen in a way that made sense to me alone. And with each small action, the distance between what was and what is grew wider, until it no longer felt like distance at all, just separation. By the afternoon, the call stopped, replaced by a single message that remained on the screen longer than the others, longer, more deliberate, asking where I was, asking if I was serious, and I read it once, before setting the phone face down on the counter. Because seriousness was not something that needed to be declared, it was something that showed itself through action, and my actions had already spoken clearly enough. I stepped outside later that day, walking a few blocks just to feel movement, just to remind myself that life continued without needing permission from anyone else. And as I returned to the apartment, unlocking the door with a key that belonged only to me, I realized something that had been building quietly beneath everything else. This was not about what he had lost, or even what I had left behind. It was about what I had chosen to keep: control, clarity, and the understanding that when someone believes they can replace you, they rarely consider what happens when you remove everything they thought they could return to. And somewhere in the distance, he was still trying to piece together a reality that no longer existed, while I had already stepped fully into one that I did not hear from him again that night. And by the next morning, the silence had settled into something final, not tense, not uncertain, just complete, as if whatever urgency had driven his calls had finally run into the reality he could no longer avoid. I moved through my day without interruption, making coffee, opening the windows, letting the fresh air fill a space that now belonged entirely to me. And for the first time in years, I noticed how quiet felt different when it was not forced, when it was chosen. Later that afternoon, my phone lit up once more, not with a call this time, but with a single message, longer than the others, the tone different, less demanding, more scattered, as if the structure he relied on had started to collapse, and he was trying to rebuild it with words. He said he did not expect things to go this way, that he needed time to think, that we should talk when he got back. And I read it once, slowly, not searching for meaning, but recognizing the pattern, the attempt to regain control through conversation, through negotiation, through the idea that this was something that could still be adjusted. and I set the phone down without replying, because there was nothing left to negotiate. The decision had already been made, not in that moment, not even in the past few days, but over time, through every small detail I had ignored until it became impossible to ignore anything at all. I stepped outside again as the sun began to lower, walking further this time, not because I needed to escape anything, but because I could. And as I moved through streets that did not hold my past, I realized something that had been quietly forming beneath everything else. I was not starting over, I was continuing, just without the weight of someone who believed they could walk away and return without consequence. When I came back to the apartment, the light inside felt softer, calmer, and I sat by the window for a moment, looking out at a view that had no history attached to it. No expectations, no promises, just space. And I understood then that what I had done was not about punishment. It was not about making him feel what I had felt. It was about removing myself from a version of life that no longer existed the moment he decided I could be replaced. And as I reached for my phone one last time that evening, I turned it off completely, not out of anger, but out of clarity, because whatever he was still trying to hold on to had already ended the moment he assumed I would still be there waiting. And now there was nothing left for me to prove, nothing left to explain, only a quiet certainty that the life I stepped into next would be one I chose entirely on my own.